Welcome back to the Wildly Unexplained Podcast. We have a very exciting episode. I'm Gary.
And I'm Danny. What's up, brother?
Not too much, my man. So today is episode number 5. Can you believe it?
Wow, time flies when you're having fun, huh?
It really does, my man. So episode 5 is kind of a neat one. It's really just bizarre on both cases that we have for the listeners today.
And this first one right in your backyard.
Yeah, which is a little scary for me. I kind of don't want to leave my house at this point.
I know, you've been there, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Not to this particular hike where he's been, but I have been in the area. And it's a little concerning, but it is what it is. So let's hop right into it, and we'll just kind of start peeling it back.
Yeah, dude, let's do it.
All right. So Dr. James McGrogan. That's the name of the guy. So disappeared March 14th, 2014 in Vail, Colorado. So he and a group of friends actually set out for a hike around 8:30 a.m. in the rugged wilderness north of the town, Vail. So Vail for me is like an hour 25, hour and a half away. So we frequent up there to go skiing, even hiking. We've been there hiking.
Yeah, it looks like a really popular place to go do anything
super cluttered. It's very touristy place in Denver here, or I should say right outside of Denver. Especially with the resort that they have there. They have the mountain for skiing. I mean, it's a super popular place.
Yeah, and I mean, it looks like they chose this place because it's so beautiful, it's so popular. Because James himself, he was a 39-year-old emergency room physician from Indiana. And he was visiting on a wilderness vacation with some of his coworkers. They were headed up to Camp Hale, and I don't know if you've heard about this place, but
that one I actually haven't.
Okay, so it's basically a camp with a collection of huts tucked away deep into the mountains, which kind of serve as temporary shelters for hikers and campers. And these were super popular for hikers and backpackers in the summer and backcountry skiers in the winter.
Which makes sense because Vail's a very popular destination exactly for all that.
Yeah. But nonetheless, the group, they set in the direction of a cabin called the Eisman Hut. And this one was particularly popular because I looked up on Google Maps and I found some videos on the location. So the hut's actually perched on a steep ridge overlooking the Rocky Mountains. It's kind of a breathtaking view. Yeah, the hut itself is only 4 miles from where the group started, and it's right near US Interstate 70.
Okay.
Yeah, so the hike itself was only a 9-mile trail through steep and wooded terrain. Well, by no means is the hut considered easy to reach by any means, but that's part of the appeal to a lot of these hikers who frequented the location.
Yeah, and typically speaking, when people are vacationing in Vail or even in neighboring mountains or anything like that, they want to have that beautiful backdrop. They want to have that that appeal of having just that look off, that just being up high in the mountains. Having that beautiful drop off, and everything like that to kind of look down the mountain. That's really sought after.
Yeah, it's a popular trail, a difficult trail, but they came out there fully prepared to tackle whatever they might expect out here.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too that is so kind of peculiar about this case is how prepared they were. So for the hike itself, the hike itself was particularly challenging. But they were all experienced, so James and his friends were all very experienced with this, and had done this quite often. So, to kind of carry on that notion, James actually had on him a personal cell phone, some basic medical supplies, a sleeping bag, avalanche beacon, a GPS, a shovel, a split snowboard with skins, warm clothing, and then plenty of food and water.
Right.
So, and at the time of the hike, the weather was absolutely gorgeous. It was clear. The group seemed prepared for any, obstacles that they might encounter at that point.
It's interesting that you mentioned all the gear that James had. And he's, out of all the cases we've covered and the majority of the cases I've looked into, James was one of the most well-prepared hikers that I've read upon. Just the fact, obviously he had a cell phone,
right,
medical supplies, an avalanche beacon. Not everybody carries those. A GPS, he had a lot of gear. He was super prepared. That's why this kid, it just adds a little bit extra mystery to the ultimate disappearance.
It definitely adds to the mystique factor here. I mean, just because of the fact, I mean, he had a cell phone, you know, with actually a backup battery in it as well. So we actually didn't even cover that. But the cell phone had a backup battery, and when the coroner had actually, you know, picked up the cell phone, he actually turned it on.
Yeah, so it worked.
So it did work. So, you know, and that's kind of getting ahead of myself here, but, you know, that just kind of goes to show, I mean, this guy was prepared for literally anything.
All right.
I mean, the GPS, the cell phone with the backup battery, you know, the shovel, you know, the avalanche beacon, you know, et cetera, you know, it just goes to play into the fact that this guy was prepared for literally, like, I mean, besides for coming across something that could potentially harm him, you know, physically, like another animal, you know, or like a predatory case.
Yeah, he didn't have a handgun.
Right, he did not have any sort of self-defense on him by any means. So, but you know, for hiking and hunting hiking purposes, he was completely taken care of.
Yeah, and I mean, they were all well prepared, and you know, initially when the group departed, they had no problems on that trail. Mm-hmm. Everything was going according to plan. Around 10 a.m. though, the group was around 5 miles from their destination, and they stopped to take a short rest. Shortly thereafter, James said he was going to go check out the trail ahead a bit, and you know, he stated that he was going to meet up with the group further down the trail.
Famous last words.
Yeah, and you know, that's peculiar because in a lot of these cases we cover, the point of separation, you know, people choose to either by accident or by their own decisions, they get separated from the group. And I think that was ultimately like one of like the first things that led to James' disappearance. You know, he went off on his own. Right.
Well, and again, like you said, I mean, that's kind of like a common occurrence with most of these cases. You know, somebody wanders off or, you know, ventures out on their own because they, you know, they feel comfortable in this environment, they feel comfortable in the area, you know, et cetera, you know. But at the same time too, when you wander off alone, you basically pluck yourself away from the group. You're a standalone target.
Yeah, note to self, you know, always be with somebody out in the outdoors.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, one of my rules of thumb too, you know, especially for living here out here in Colorado, I mean, even before I knew anything about all this, the missing 411 cases or anything like that, you know, was hike with a buddy, you know, at least like one other person, you know, because you never know what's going to happen and you never know where you're going to be, you know. So, I mean, regardless of these missing 411 cases or if there is, you know, some, you know, other, other aspect out there that's you know, catching these people or, you know, doing whatever, you know, if you have somebody there, if something ever does happen, you have a higher chance of getting out of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, like you said, good rule of thumb, always have a buddy there, somebody to back you up, you know, watch your back. But I mean, nonetheless, you know, James head down the trail on his own. And not long after he was out of line of sight, you know, the rest of the group continued on. So they actually started moving shortly after James started walking. So it's not like they waited 10 minutes, half an hour. You know, it was probably a few minutes from the point that he departed to where they followed on this trail.
And to be fair, though, I mean, like he did say he would meet up with you guys, like, down the trail a little ways.
Exactly. So, I mean, he walked to the point where he was out of line of sight, and the group continued on. But the thing is, they didn't see him anywhere down the trail, and they didn't see him when they reached the hut. There was no sign of him. You know, they called his name, there wasn't a response, and they searched the area. They found no sign of James. You know, he was wearing a bright jacket that day, and they searched for him the rest of the day. They found no trace of him, and ultimately, you know, they decided to contact the sheriff's department and report him missing,
which is the right thing to do in this case. I mean,
I think they obviously did a great job here.
So going back to, you know, episode 4, you know, where, you know, we've got, you know, this hunter that goes missing, and he's missing for a couple days, and then he gets reported. You know, these people are wasting zero time.
No, definitely Aaron Hedges, and this case is different because they definitely they implemented you know, good common sense, and they, as soon as they obviously they looked for him and they realized, you know, something's wrong, so they reported him missing.
Yeah, which definitely makes sense. But I mean, at this point of the game, you know, James' companions, you know, all his friends were extremely baffled. You know, how just he wandered off, you know, ahead, you know, nowhere to be found at this point, completely vanishes. Especially how fast that occurred. I mean, because, the moment he left, like you said, they only took a few minutes before they were back on the trail and they were heading to this hut.
Right.
So they didn't hear any sort of cries, nothing to really say that, like, hey, James is in trouble, we should go help him, or to even say where he was.
Because if it was an animal predation case, if it was been a bear, mountain lion, something along those lines, like have we covered in the past before, if he wasn't that far away from them. So if something like this would have happened to him at this point, you would have heard something. James would have cried out for help. Typically, like I said previously, animal predation cases, they're so gruesome and violent.
Yeah, they're ugly. They're real ugly.
Yeah, so that part, it's mysterious that, shortly after walking, he completely vanished. His friends were like, what the hell just happened to James? But nonetheless, it happened, and we've seen it so many times before. Because, not only that he didn't cry out for help, but also the fact that the trail was well delineated all the way over to the hut.
Sure. And that's a huge point to make too. At that point of the game, it should have been an easy hike.
No, definitely. So it doesn't make sense to me why he would have gone off trail when obviously he knew where he was going. He could follow the trail all the way to his destination.
Right. Well, and shortly after this, a search begins. The area is exhaustively combed, for 5 days. We've got people on foot. We've got snowmobiles, we've got helicopters, but there was zero sign of this doctor. And they were actually forced to call the search off because the winds became too dangerous.
Yes,
so now,
and we've seen it before, the atmospheric events taking place.
And it's so bizarre. And I realize, like for Colorado, the mountains are no joke, dude.
No.
They have a ton of snow. They've got winds that are brutal. And especially up in the elevation, that where they were. Vail especially. Like if you ever go, take a ski trip, go to Vail or, go to Keystone or wherever, you get up on the ski lift and it gets windy up there, man.
Oh, I believe it. And being such high elevation, being in the mountains, the weather changes so rapidly in these areas, So, was it an unexplained phenomenon? Probably not, but, it's definitely, it sucks that it happened, it's unfortunate, but nonetheless, the strong winds, ultimately shut down the search and rescue efforts.
Right. Well, which, again, it's just, it's so bizarre that this always kind of comes back to a common theme. With the atmospheric events and everything, and it's just kind of wild to think about that.
Yeah. Who knows? But it happened, and we've seen it many times before. But so 2 weeks after the search officially ended, it seemed like James had just stepped off the face of the earth, and there was no trace of him. But ultimately, two backcountry skiers, they stumbled upon James' body lying face down an ice chute 4.5 miles from the trail he had been on. Oddly, in an area that was already searched before multiple times. Another profile point.
Right, and we've seen this many times before, in the cases that we've covered where, the person goes missing, then, the search and rescue teams, they scour the areas, and we're not just talking like a one walkthrough, like we're talking like multiple walkthroughs, like, many different avenues, for the search and rescue teams, on foot, dogs, snowmobiles, helicopters, name it, like they're using it. And then, all of a sudden, a couple days later, the body just, winds up just out of nowhere.
Yeah, and like I said, we've seen it time and time before, but like the autopsy ultimately was performed, and the official cause of death would be reported as trauma caused by a fall to his head and to his chest. But while the question of whether he was still alive or not was like now answered, obviously, they found his body here, but there were still a lot of questions, swirling about for this case. Like for one odd underreported detail about the body was that when they found his body, he was missing his shoes, Gary.
Which, again, a very common occurrence for the cases that we're looking into.
Yeah.
Like you're in an environment where shoes are necessary. Like
absolutely.
Not even saying like they're important. They are necessary.
No, and when you look at the terrain he would have had to like traverse to get to where he ultimately met his demise, it's snow, it's deep snow, changes in elevation, far distances. It just doesn't make sense to me. And even after an intense search, his shoes were never found. Like, why would he take them off in such a cold, snowy weather? And where did they go?
Yeah, well, I want to make a really important point here as well. So he was found 4.5 miles from the trail that he was on, right?
Yeah.
So that's airborne. That's like if you fly from where he started to where he ended, like that's 4.5 miles straight.
Yeah. So
but
as the
most
crow
people,
flies,
right? So most people, who hike and who know how to hike and everything like that, are very confident in the fact that you're never just walking in a straight line when you're hiking.
No, definitely not. And being that this is Colorado and the trail that he was on, it was a large amount of changes in elevation, up and down through, rough terrain and deep snow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to cut back, you've got to go around, certain avenues and everything like that. I mean, so we're realistically looking at 12 to 16 miles, up and down elevations, which would have taken multiple days.
Yeah, no, it's definitely bizarre, and think about it was without shoes, through snow drifts, up and down elevation. It's extremely rough terrain that he would have had to cross.
Right.
And, he would have to gone and if you trace back his steps from where he went missing to the point where they found him, he would have had to gone off trail, climbed over 1,200 feet of elevation to a peak of 11,000 feet. And then from that point, he would have had to descend 1,000 feet, successfully cross a creek, then make an 1,100-foot ascent up to a ridgeline on Bald Mountain, which in itself is 12,000 feet in elevation. And then finally, James would have had to make a descent 1,000 feet to a lower summit, and then an 1,100-foot descent onto Booth Falls, allegedly without using his skis because they were in his pack. And there would have been 30-foot snow drifts and risks of avalanche.
Yeah, so, which to me, and again, like that just kind of coattails back onto the it's not just 4.5 miles. That would be like 12 to 16 miles, that we're talking about that this guy has to traverse, going up and going down, these mountaintops and everything like that. So
yeah.
Like to me, did this guy just get lost?
I don't know, but I mean, obviously he vanished from the trail, but and they say that it would have taken, this trek would have taken the most experienced climber / hiker multiple days, so he was out here for a while.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to kind of add on to that too, if you do actually watch the Missing 411 YouTube video on this, like, Dave Paulides actually makes a very valid point. Where he was on the trail and everything, he had cell phone service. Why wasn't the cell phone used to contact anybody? Why wasn't, the GPS used? What happened, to him that obviously he did not use and utilize, both of these extremely important devices. And furthermore, why would you bring this on the trip with you if you're not going to use it?
It makes you wonder why, he didn't use his cell phone or his GPS when, if you go back, actually, David Paulides did an excursion to retrace his steps, and he traced everything back, and he had phone service where James was found, and subsequently at every point in between. So obviously, James' phone was working when they found it. He had an extra battery. He had a GPS. Why didn't he use it? Did he know he was lost? Because obviously he was traversing some really hard terrain. Why didn't he try to reach out for help? And obviously he was going the wrong way. It makes you wonder. There's a lot of holes in that situation.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about that. And I mean, we didn't even cover the snow drifts, when we were talking about the mileage and the ascent and the descent that he would have had to do. I mean, there were 30-foot snow drifts, and also the risk of avalanche, which is why he had all the avalanche gear on him. So
yeah.
that just really, to me, I mean, just says, this guy didn't just get lost. Something obviously happened, to either deter him from the original path, or, I mean, how, or how the hell did he get over to, where he ended up?
I have no idea. That's like I said, it's extremely bizarre. Just this whole situation of him going off trail, all the gear he had, and the terrain he covered. It's just there's so many questions in this one.
Yeah, and I mean, just the evasion that, obviously after his body was found, like searchers had, again, scoured the area, to find this guy, and they didn't find him. And we're not just talking like on foot, like we're talking about like snowmobiles, helicopters, like the whole army of sorts, that are looking for this guy, and he just evades them.
Yeah, it makes you wonder where was James at the point they were looking for him, because search and rescue stated that where his body was ultimately found, they had searched that area multiple times and
Right.
the area around it. So, how did he get there? I don't understand.
Well, and so like one of the major points like that I do want to bring up too is that the ruggedness of the terrain that, where he was, so I mean that could have potentially allowed him to remain hidden.
Right.
After he did end up, if he did fall or, quote unquote, from the coroner's report, had that traumatic injury, from falling, but how he got there is very strange, so
Absolutely.
Dave Paulides actually interviews the rental shop where he rented all the gear from and everything like that, talks to the guy, and he's like, listen, like, is that a path that like normal, or like even like, experienced, hikers and skiers or slash boarders would take? And this guy was like, no, like not since I've been in this business, like no, like that's not like a normal path.
No, it didn't make sense. The trail that he took, he went off trail, up and down elevation through thick snow. Like, why? And he had a cell phone and GPS on him. Like, was he in the right state of mind? And there was no inkling or inclination that James was had any mental health issues. So
Right.
I mean, that would rule that possibility out. And obviously he wasn't grabbed by an animal on the trail because he was found so far away, and obviously the wounds and the cause of death don't match that.
Yeah, and I mean, just kind of circling back around, I mean, what makes this case so bizarre is that, it basically happened, right under the noses of all the people he was with. So again, he wasn't just by himself, like he wasn't alone hiking. He was with a group of people, and this happened literally within minutes, of him separating from the group. And, they had called out for him, and just tried to find him. I mean, they never heard from him. He did not try to contact them, by cell phone. They didn't hear him in the woods or anything. And when they had tried to contact him via cell, he didn't respond.
Yeah, exactly. He had the cell phone. They tried to contact him. Did he not get the phone calls? Like, for some reason, did he not have cell service at the entire time he was out there? Was his GPS not working? Like, I don't think we'll ever know, honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, to be completely honest with you, though, I mean, to kind of, quote what I said before, about the missing 411, video that Dave Paulides has actually submitted on YouTube for this. He had cell service out there. He said he had 2 bars.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I can't necessarily agree with, the fact that this guy lost cell service somewhere. I mean, and again, I want to kind of backtrack there, and I will say this. I have hiked multiple locations where cell service is minimal, and some places you don't even have it at all. So, I mean, maybe he did encounter like a dead zone, per se, where his cell phone and his GPS just did not work. The GPS working, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that not working, because typically that's satellite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but still doesn't explain the fact that he went off trail and took this tremendous journey to the point where he ultimately, succumbed to his fate.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the 2 backcountry skiers found him face down on an ice chute. I mean, that's horrible. That is a horrible way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Our condolences to the McGrogan family.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's just awful. I mean, and it's very scary. I mean, because these wildernesses, I mean, can be unforgiving. And it, if anything, I just want to express how careful you should be if you do go hiking. Take it seriously. Do not take it as a joke. I mean, again, some of these situations that the wilderness can bring. Are very unforgiving.
Yeah, and they can be avoided, if you follow some rules, stay together, always be prepared. But sometimes it doesn't always turn out well for these people.
Right. Well, that's all the time we have for that case. So case number 2 is Dennis Martin, who disappeared June 14th of 1969.
Yeah, this is a peculiar case. It's a really popular case, not just in the missing 411 criteria, but just in a general missing persons case. The Dennis Martin one is definitely one a lot of people know and have heard about. It's quite bizarre.
Yeah, when I first came across this case, I was just kind of like, what the heck, man? Like,
yeah.
Like, really?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the facts and I was like, wow, like, I can't believe like that's what was reported.
Right. Well, and that just kind of feeds the mystique behind it and everything, So, yeah. I mean, granted, this was a much different time. We didn't have the technology that we have nowadays and everything like that. So, keep that in mind. But, kind of trying to, again, keep an open mind to, to this case and everything else. It's very interesting. So,
absolutely.
June 14th, 1969, kind of to set the tone here, the Martin family was actually visiting the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The camping trip that they were on was a family tradition. They actually hiked to Spence Field near the Appalachian Trail, and that's where they had actually intended to camp out and to spend the night.
Yeah.
So Dennis is playing hide and seek with his 9-year-old brother. So Dennis is 6, by the way, at this time. He's playing hide and seek with his 9-year-old brother. Another family comes along asking if their boys could actually play with the Martins. So, and this is where I find the story to be a little weird. So, oddly enough, the family that had showed up, after, had actually said that their last name was also Martin.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not really sure like where that kind of plays into the story, but I think it's just kind of like a coincidental fact.
Yeah.
But still weird nonetheless.
Yeah, it was definitely odd enough that we thought we should put that in there, but
yeah,
that was the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dennis was actually last seen by his father. He was heading towards he was heading into a bush to hide. His intention was to basically surprise the other kids as they walked by. So after not seeing him for about 5 minutes or so, and when all the other kids had actually returned to the campsite, the father becomes really, really concerned. Begins searching. He runs up and down the trail for nearly 2 miles until he was sure he could not have gotten any further. After several hours of this just searching, they finally sought help from the National Park Service Rangers.
Yeah, and the area where Martin disappeared, it's marked by steep slopes, ravines, and obviously, Smoky Mountains. We've got wild animals such as snakes, copperhead snakes, on the least, bears, feral hogs, bobcats. They all inhabit this area.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like these national parks, they're really no joke. I mean, it's you have to be so cautious, when you're going out there. But to kind of keep the common theme going, a downpour breaks out shortly after Martin's disappearance, dropping 3 inches of rain in a matter of hours. So that's a lot of rain.
Yeah, the downpour.
Yeah, actually, that's a downpour at this point. So the rain actually washed out trails and caused streams to flood. Temperatures on the night of June 14th actually dropped to nearly 50 degrees. So at this point of the game, it's possible that Dennis died after succumbing to the cold of the torrential rain or from other threats in the area. To this point, we know nothing about, if this kid's dead, if he's alive, if he's just out there having a great time.
Yeah, and he's only a 6-year-old kid in the wilderness, and going back to the massive amount of rain and the flooding, the kid's wet, he's out there by himself, it's dark out there, there's all sorts of predators out there. Dennis could have succumbed to a number of things out here while he was by himself, but most importantly, more than likely, the cold of him being wet in the outdoors.
Right. So search efforts, which included a separate search by the National Guard and Special Forces, So, little asterisk there. Found no trace. Heavy rains during the first day's search hampered the efforts, and heavy mist followed the next day. Up to 1,400 people were involved in the search effort, potentially obscuring possible clues, which, you've got 1,400 people, involved in the search. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
If they miss something, obviously a footprint, something like that gets stepped on, or, possible lead, it can happen.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to obviously the special forces, I looked into it, and apparently Dennis' dad had a contact in the military base nearby, and they brought Green Berets out to search. And I mean, sure, that's not common, but that is something that the Green Berets, special forces, have been known to do in the past, to assist in search and rescue efforts, to put their resources in to finding missing people. But nonetheless, it's a 6-year-old kid. 1,400 people are brought out. Everybody's frantic trying to find them, and that might have hindered the ability to find him, because they kind of tarnished the area if he would have left a mini trail, like much of evidence where he was at.
Well, and to coattail to what you just said, so footprints were actually found in the area, but they were dismissed as being Martin's and determined by park officials to have been left by a Boy Scout. So again, you've got 1,400 people here that are scouring these grounds and just hoping to find any sort of trace of this young kid. But at the same time, all these people, are going to leave some sort of trace behind, and it's going to muddle the search. And that's exactly what happened. So the child-sized footprints actually led to a stream where they actually just disappear.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you look at the tracks they left by, these other tracks that they found, they actually indicated that one foot was barefoot, while the other one was in an Oxford, the type of shoe that Martin was wearing, and this was confirmed by his parents. It's a type of shoe, tennis shoe. And retired park ranger and author Dwight MacArthur believes that the prints likely belonged to Martin, as the tracks were not part of a group that the Boy Scouts were searching. And none of the kids were barefoot while in the middle of the search. And actually, a shoe and a sock were also found in the area.
That's crazy. Wow. So by June 22nd, 56 square miles of ground had been covered at this point. So more than 1,000 searchers continued to look until June 26th, when the search was cut back. The search was then abandoned on June 29th after a last search was performed. The search was officially closed down 3 months after, so September 14th, 1969. Right. As of today, it's still the largest search in the history of the Great Smoky Nationals. Just massive. Again, 1,400 people.
Yeah, 1,400 people, 56 square miles covered, helicopters, dog crews, foot patrols. They blanketed the area for weeks and weeks on end. They weren't able to find any trace of little Dennis.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of theories that kind of follow this case, and people kind of bounce back and forth and everything. And one of the theories that is that he became lost and he perished from exposure or some other cause, likely during the first night. So that's the most probable theory, according to most park officials that that will discuss this case. Others actually say that he was attacked by a hungry bear, or maybe even less likely, a feral pig, and got carried off.
Right. And then the third one, which is the most sensational one, and is actually, his father was a proponent for this theory. The third one was they say that he was abducted and taken out of the park by something or someone. On the afternoon that Dennis actually disappeared, tourist Harold Key and his family, they heard an enormous, sickening scream. That's how they described it.
This just gave me chills.
Yeah, exactly. Enormous, sickening scream is what he said. And shortly thereafter, they witnessed a man covered in hair, seemingly hiding and carrying something on his shoulder. The park rangers and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they concluded that there wasn't sufficient evidence to link Martin's disappearance with what they had seen, because this happened approximately 5 miles away from where Martin disappeared, even though it happened a little while after Dennis went missing. So, the family also said that the person in the woods had something slumped over its shoulder. And apparently it was a highly visible red color,
Oh my God.
matching the shirt that Martin had that day he went missing.
See, like stuff like that, I mean, just kind of scares the shit out of me. Just because, so you've got this 6-year-old little boy, goes behind a bush. All of a sudden, 5 minutes later, he's gone.
Yeah.
All the kids report back to the campsite except for him. Then, you have this other family 5 miles away that's like, oh, no, like, we totally saw somebody with a bright red shirt on, slumped over this, like, whatever this thing, over his shoulder and carrying him into the woods. I mean, I'm assuming he had dinner that night.
Right, but I mean, and also not to mention, the enormous sickening scream. And just thinking about that, like, why would this family make that up? Why would they make up that theory? I mean, it's possible ultimately, but it's bizarre, but it makes you wonder, what happened. Obviously, it would lead you to think that there was some sort of abduction that took place here. Was it just a really ragged man? Because I've heard stories of wild men, living out in the wilderness, off the radar.
Sure.
But they said it was a man covered in hair, a large man covered in hair, carrying something over his shoulder.
Well, so like to me, like my first initial question to that is like, all right, so he's covered in hair, but like to what degree? Because
right.
To be real here for a second, like I've got some friends who are hairy, dude. Like they they look like they're smuggling the rainforest and under their shirts and everything like that. And like they're hairy, but
right.
like. Are we talking like a bear hairy, like like just hair everywhere, or are we just talking like little patches, like here and there, like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right. But you got the vast majority of people will say Bigfoot sighting. Massive bipedal animal covered in hair carrying this kid. Other people try to find a more logical explanation. A wild man, somebody living off the grid who does not want to be found, abducted Dennis. Keeping in mind that no remains of Dennis were ever found,
Mm-hmm.
And going back to animal predation, like we said, animal predation typically leaves evidence behind. It's a gruesome scene, and this
Sure.
many people covering the area, if he was grabbed by a bear or mountain lion, odds are they would have probably found something, some shred of evidence, but there was nothing ever found of him besides the shoes.
Wild. And I mean, just kind of going back to, I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, the cave systems and everything, just kind of, just makes me kind of think, going back to the correlation between the missing 411, clusters, and then also the cave systems, running all across the United States, how does this kind of play into, a disappearance like this? I mean, literally where the kid just disappears off the face of the earth, footprints lead to a river, gone.
Right, and I mean that is a freaky theory, isn't it? Like, that maybe there's cave systems underneath these parks where these people are. That's how they manage to vanish. Most people would prefer like a more common answer to this disappearance. He succumbed, and he just wasn't found in the wilderness. And obviously, the wilderness is unforgiving.
Sure.
The cold, the animals. And eventually nature will have its way with you, but. The fact that the area was covered, so well, and there was no evidence found, and the eyewitness testimony of this massive hairy thing carrying something over its shoulder, it just throws up a lot of question marks for this case.
It does. And I mean, to be honest with you, like, another question I've got, just off the top of my head, so if this thing was seen 5 miles, from where, little Dennis was, or had originally started, I should say, depending on how long it was, I mean, if this thing is like, obviously lives in the woods, I mean, it's getting around pretty good.
Right.
Like, in my opinion.
You in high school, you let's say, or in college, you took a criminology course. The one thing that you learn is that eyewitnesses, they're typically not very reliable with their account for time and how things happen. Things get blurry and meshed, so we don't know. They said that it happened about around the same time that he went missing. It could have happened before, it could have happened sometime after.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no way to know for sure, but
right.
I don't want to dismiss that completely just because it was so far away. because we don't know the exact details, the time and place that it happened. You know, it was about 5 miles away, but at the time, I don't think we can completely dismiss it just because of that.
No, I agree. I definitely agree on that one, and it just kind of leads to the the mysteriousness of, you know, obviously this kid going missing, you know, but then obviously these other events kind of taking place, you know. I mean, how do you make up, you know, just I mean, and again too, like, you know, this kind of makes me think too, did this family just make this story up, you know, to you know, provide this other family with some sort of closure?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible, and you know, I wouldn't put it past some people. It's just I don't see it. You know, it's something weird to make up. You know, why would they come up with this theory? You know, just to sensationalize this kid's disappearance. But nonetheless, you know, that's what the whole family had agreed that they had seen this.
Yeah, which is so bizarre to me. I mean, so bizarre.
Yeah, man. I don't know. These are two pretty wildly unexplained cases.
Yeah, to say the least, man. I mean, you know, both. Yeah. I mean, both these cases. I know, like you know, that we kind of aim to, you know, to hit like these really bizarre and, you know, just unexplained cases. But you know, these two in particular, I mean, are just kind of crazy.
Yeah, definitely. They definitely are. And you know, there's just all the profile points that match up, the things that don't add up, the amount of questions that are left, you know, especially in this Dennis Martin case, you know, happened decades ago. There's still nothing left. You know, there was nothing else found of him.
Right,
it's an open book.
That's scary, man. Super scary. Mm-hmm. But that's all we have for today. So I would like to just kind of say, if you guys do enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. You know, so we actually have a review page on Apple Podcasts. I know that a lot of our listeners are from Apple Podcasts, so if you guys could leave us a review, you know, it could be a 5-star, you know, whatever you guys think. You know, if you could write something briefly about it, you know, let us know how we're doing. If you have any sort of feedback for us, you know, please, you know, please, you know, let us know. We're looking to grow and, you know, you know, provide the best sort of content that we can for you guys. You know, so please, you know, like I said, let us know how we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on our Anchor page, you know, you can find us online on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're on YouTube now, you know, the Wildly Unexplained Podcast. You know, follow us over there. You know, we typically post content pretty frequently. You know, just check us out. And if you'd like to support the podcast, our Patreon page is up now. If you'd like to become a subscriber, you'll get access to our community Discord where you can talk to other people like you, and you'll get access to bonus content.
Yeah, which we actually just dropped our first episode. So we're very excited about that. So we will be dropping bonus content every week. You know, for those of you that, you know, would like to support our podcast and just kind of get involved. You know, so we'd love to hear from you guys, and like I said, just get that feedback from you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, it was a good one.
Absolutely, my friend. Well, until next time.
I'll catch you later, brother.
Stay safe, brother.
See ya.